Magdalene's blog 19. The weather got really cold in the weeks following on from my acceptance, with ice and snow blowing in on a persistent north wind. Life in the temple became introspective, with only essential trips being undertaken into the city and its markets. There was one casualty, too, as a direct result of this cold. The senior priestess of the library, Mistress Astel, was found dead one morning in the little cell of her reading room. She was not one of the priestesses that I knew, as she had hardly ever ventured out from Temple Court, but others felt her passing keenly. The funeral procession took her tiny empty body down to the caves and graves at the bottom of the southern hillside, where she was cremated and her ashes placed in a little pottery urn that was buried in a place of honour there. Belle herself led the procession and the tribute to the woman who had been one of her own teachers. A number of wealthy women from the city also endured the cold to attend her passing. Quite a surprising number, I thought. It made me think of the influence she must have had, and this prompted me to visit the library. My new status as novice priestess allowed me entry, and the cold weather gave me plenty of opportunity. There were two other priestesses who worked there. Philippa was one, a middle-aged woman who had been involved in teaching us as neophytes, telling us some of the stories of the gods and goddesses. I had thought of her as a rather fastidious lady, and she hadn't been a very inspiring teacher. It was Belle herself who had taken our most memorable lessons about the roles and stories of the goddesses. But Philippa was friendly enough, and in the library she took a special interest in keeping the star records. Every night, when conditions allowed, observations were made on Adonis Tower, concerning the positions and movements in the heavens. These were given to Philippa, who incorporated them into the records, updating the current positions for Belle and the other senior priestesses to use in their deliberations and predictions. The other priestess in the library was called Ariane, a young Armenian woman with curly brown hair and a round face. I would not have described her as pretty, but nonetheless she had a sort of inner glow and a jolliness that I associated with cooks and cooking, rather than the fusty rooms of a library and scriptorium. We liked each other the moment that we met, the morning that I knocked rather nervously on the library doors. Ariane was glad of a visitor, and I of the welcome I had not expected. She had come to Antioch from the temple at Tyre, specifically to study under Mistress Astel. She worked mainly in the scriptorium, maintaining its collection of ancient texts, or deciphering and copying those borrowed from other temples and libraries. She also sometimes wrote letters for Belle, one of the other senior priestesses, especially when they needed to be in Greek. She had an insatiable desire to know what was going on, what had happened in this and other places, and what might yet come to pass. She liked to be involved, and thought this was a good place to be so. Some days after my first visit, we were sitting side by side at a table in the scriptorium, enjoying some welcome sunshine coming through the unshuttered window, when I told her about my acceptance ritual and how it had gone disastrously wrong. "I don't know why Belle likes to bring in the chosen Adonis," she responded as we sat with our hands around our cups of hot tea. "It nearly always goes wrong in some way. I think she wants to make the initiation more real for certain of her chosen pupils. So perhaps she has high hopes for your future. Or uses fate to weed out those for whom the stars of destiny don't shine," I answered wryly, and she laughed. "Shame on you, Magdalene. That he couldn't exercise control with you shows in your favour, rather. You must be her special protégé." It was my turn to laugh. "I don't think so. Not when I remember her expression when she gave me that awful concoction to drink. She was furious, and I have never been so sick. It seemed to go on for hours." We giggled a bit, and I sat, remembering the dawn of that new day as I lay in the sacred grove, recovering from the night's events. That was when I first saw Venus rising before the sunrise, I said after a while. But I didn't know then what the bright star was. It was special to me because I was so weak, and it seemed so beautiful and full of... I couldn't think of the right word, but Ariane looked sideways at me, nodding. She said, not trying to name the magic quality either. Yes, purity, I answered myself. We finished our tea and got out the document we had been working on together. It was a Hebrew scripture, and I understood the context better than she did, and for once I was able to help her by explaining some of its references. I'd worked hard in my youth, and was glad of that now. But of Enoch's travels, I knew very little. She was teaching me so much about all of the different schools of learning there were and had been in the world that she knew about, and I was glad of this chance to try to return something. Then out of the blue, Ariane suggested the possibility of sending a message to my mother to let her know that I was well. Up until the time of my acceptance, I had given hardly any thought to my family in Magdalene. Now that that event passed, I somehow felt that I could think of my former home again. I was no longer just running away. It was time to assess now where I got to and where I might be going. I wasn't sure whether to make it a long letter or give any details of what I was doing. Would any other than my mother care? I didn't know. In the end, I settled for a short note, sending my love and saying that I was all right and living and working with friends in Antioch. I didn't give any details, but no doubt she would be able to guess a bit from the way the letter would reach her. When the weather improved, Ariane would arrange for the letter to go on one of the regular routes to Tyre, where she had a friend called Rachel. They'd worked together in the temple there before Ariane had come to Antioch. Ariane also wrote a letter of explanation to Rachel and included a little money to help her get the letter to my mother. A little kindness that would go a long way.